Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao on Pod TV. And on Pod TV, we bring you great news from around the world, talk about innovation and what we can do to build back better and get rid of this pandemic and get back to living our lives as normal citizens of the world. I'm Steve Rao, your host. And today on World Edition, I'm going to be opening up my monologue. Might go a little longer based on an op-ed that I have submitted to numerous publications on immigration. The Biden administration's first few months in the presidency, in the White House, brought changes in immigration policy. This included the revocation of the Muslim travel ban, a push for citizenship for undocumented workers, and serious efforts to address the border crisis, although the situation keeps getting worse. The House finally passed the Dream and Modernization Act, Promise Act, and the Farm Work Modernization Act, Workforce Act, which would create a pathway to citizenship for the dreamers and give worker status to undocumented farm laborers. But in a new amicus brief filed last week, Google makes it clear it's going to take more than just presidential action to get our skilled workers back to work. Along with tech giants such as Apple, Amazon, and Intel, Google is opposing a legal push to bar spouses of skilled workers on H-1B visas from gaining lawful employment. There are about 90,000 of these spouses, mostly women, of course, working, and they call that the H-4 visa. I want to tell you that the stakes have never been higher for skilled immigration. It's the elephant in the room that we're not talking about. And not just for tech companies that would struggle to hire skilled workers if their spouses were barred from working. Highly educated workers would be forbidding from using their talents for our entire economy, would lower American GDP by around $7.5 billion per year and rob the federal government of $1.9 billion in tax revenues. I can tell you from practical experience in Research Triangle, where I sit as an elected official, employers are struggling to hire the skilled workers they need to fuel our innovation economy right here in North Carolina. Immigrants are needed to fill the skills gap. In Raleigh, I'll give you some interesting data. Almost a quarter of immigrants hold a graduate degree, compared to less than a sixth of the native-born population. Statewide, according to the New American Economy organization I sit on the board with, immigrants make up more than 18% of our workforce in STEM fields, science, engineering, technology, and math, and 35% of our software developers were born overseas. With the lack of skilled workers and skilled American workers, 7 of the 10 fastest growing occupations where employers request high-skilled worker visas were computer-related. So tech is affected, and the rollover work visas for H-1B spouses is just the tip of the iceberg. It's going to get harder and harder and harder to find these skills. The problem reached crisis levels when former President Trump banned all green cards issued to residents of particular countries. And this meant many engineers, computer scientists, and doctors from populous places, such as India, for example, are getting stuck on temporary visas. 200,000 skill-born Indian American immigrants will die of old age before getting their green cards. Some of them I meet in City Hall every day. They've been trying to become citizens for 15 years. I will end my monologue on a personal note. I know how important it is to allow skilled workers to put down roots. My parents came from India to the United States in 1968, so my father could work in rural West Virginia as a surgeon. They got a chance to build their lives here. Thousands of patients received quality patient care from my father, and he grew up as a proud American and raised a wonderful family and still lives in Morrisville. Change is on the horizon. Earlier this year, the Biden administration proposed the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, which would eliminate the country cap and increase the number of green cards issued. This would set aside 40,000 unused green cards for healthcare workers, because healthcare is also a big part of where these workers would go. And the Biden administration is resurrecting, finally, the foreign-born entrepreneur rule, which would grant visas to startup founders who create jobs and raise U.S. seed capital. A move that in my opinion, will ensure that the next Google, SaaS, Red Hat, Tesla, Zoom, Slack, and other startups could be founded right here in North Carolina. Such measures will drive economic growth, but will require a bipartisan legislation effort for lawmakers to come together and help our skilled immigrants. This is critically important to fueling innovation for driving economic growth in our economy. Let's make it happen. This was based on an op-ed that I've submitted to the New York Times and a number of periodicals and journalists in North Carolina. Sorry I went over my time, but I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the data that I've shared about skilled immigration and see how we can bring this conversation more to the immigration debate. With me, I have Mark Lee, Shaquille Latimer, and Sasha Starr. So
Good
anyway,
morning.
yeah, sorry I went a little over my time, but I had a lot of information to get and was an op-ed, but most of it I sort of paraphrased it. Hope you enjoyed it. And I'm going to start with Shaquille Latimer. Shaquille, you've been, as someone that's in business, you've traveled all around the world. How important is skilled immigration to economic growth?
Well, look, skilled immigration it can be helpful. It can be, but I think we have to be careful about thinking that a solution to a problem is to bring in skilled immigrants rather than asking the question as to why people born in the country are not filling those jobs themselves. Is there something wrong with the education system? Is there something wrong with the culture? Is there something else that's going on? I think that's important. I think that there has to be a balance. Now, having said that, obviously I'm a firstborn Australian. I'm a first generation Australian. My mother immigrated to this country from Fiji, and had she not, then I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I've had. And for all of the things that I say on this show and in my own personal life, criticizing government and criticizing regulations and all of those things, I'm incredibly grateful and I feel very blessed that I'm lucky enough to be born in a Western country with the opportunities that the West has provided to me. So I would just say that, immigrants, we know across the Western world that immigrants the next generation down tends to outperform the native born people. I think that's probably culture. I think that's people coming from very poor backgrounds that have instilled in their children a work ethic and pay attention to your studies and things like that. But we do have to be careful of making sure that the local population doesn't feel as though they don't have opportunities and they're being sidelined, and immigrants being preference. So I do think it's delicate.
Okay, that's a really good point, and I'm going to go to Sasha Starr, who, Sasha, there's a saying that, I've heard that there is a sign in Silicon Valley that says, if you can't get your work permit, come to Canada. So I can tell you that I hear a lot of people from even where I'm sitting in North Carolina, and many are from India, they're moving to Toronto because they want to start companies and they say, I want to go somewhere where, so apparently Canada's making it a lot easier for these immigrants to come in. What's your take on it as someone that talks about modern investing and economics?
It's hard to say. It could be just as well that today Canada represents a more viable option for immigrants. With its, I think, kind of easier adaptation, lifestyle, much less crime. At the same time, it's a fairly sustainable economy and a lot of high-tech developments or so on. So it could be that Canada is a viable option for sure.
Yes. Mark Lee, what do you, we're going to talk about this for a few minutes, and then we're going to jump back into Israel and talk about world affairs today. What is your take about, immigration? You sit in Durham, we've got Duke, I didn't really talk about the foreign-born students. So, we have over, I think, hundreds and thousands of foreign-born students in our universities. But sitting in Durham, what is your take on immigration, skilled immigration?
No, I mean, skilled immigration is very much of a necessity. I mean, we're seeing a lot of skilled immigrants coming to those universities. Like you said, I live practically around the corner from Duke University, and there are a lot of skilled immigrant students that are, coming into programs, whether it's medicine, whether it's engineering, whether it's business. And that's not just here. That's also even at our community colleges and at our HBCUs. Durham is also the home of North Carolina Central University. I remember my good friend Buna, who does a African program of African music and all on WNCU, which is a radio station based here in Durham, that he came here basically as an immigrant from one of those Eastern African countries and all of that. But, he had the pleasure of working and becoming almost like a second son to John Hope Franklin and all while he was here. So I've seen stories like that. And of course, there's even a major restaurant here, well, several of them that are, been launched by immigrants here in this area. I'm thinking about like Dorsha's, which is an Ethiopian-based restaurant, or Zweli's, which is owned by a couple. The gentleman is African American, but his wife is from Zimbabwe. And then there is a number of other things along those same lines. The Palace International, which is, of course, is Kenyan-based and is almost like an institution here in Durham. So we've seen, immigrants start basically what amounts to institutions here in this area. I would argue the same about Vimala's over there in Chapel Hill, which is an Indian restaurant that is definitely somewhat of an institution as well. And a lot of those people are involved in activism areas around immigration, because I know that Vimala's daughter, Manju, does a lot of work, not just in the Indian community, but in the Latin American community as well, in terms of like trying to make sure of people's awareness of what the immigrants are going through. So definitely I find it to be a vibrant part of our history here in North Carolina, but I've got friends throughout the country and I hear similar stories from them as well.
Well, before we hand it over to
Can I,
Rex,
can I just say something there, Steve? Do you
oh,
mind?
please, please, no, of course.
Sorry, and I don't want to be the sort of the big white Anglo-Saxon conservative that I am depicted as, but I do want to just say something here. It's of course especially being a child of an immigrant, I'm going to advocate for immigration. I think that there should be pathways for people who want to improve their lives to have the opportunity to live in Western countries and to create a life for themselves. I think that's fantastic. But when we talk about immigration, it's really interesting. We have the same thing here in Australia. We talk about immigrants coming from really poor countries, from countries in Africa, from poor places in Asia, etc. But we don't talk about like French immigrants coming to America, or German immigrants, or Australian immigrants to America, or American immigrants to Australia. And the reason why is because we don't actually see very much of it. So it's not just about skilled immigration. It's actually about skilled immigration from countries that are relatively poor. And I would just reinforce my previous point. If you've got people who are really poor in America, I think it's understandable for them to say, hey, I can't get into medical school, and somebody who's coming from a much poorer country than us has got a spot at that medical school. What about me? I live here. My parents were from here. I think that's a point, and I think it's very dangerous to dismiss those people out of hand. They have a point as well, and it needs to be acknowledged.
No, I would definitely agree with you on that, Shaquille. One of the things I would add, and this is one of the things that I think that even Steve can allude to as well, is that while we oftentimes don't talk about the immigrants that are coming from those countries, a lot of those immigrants are actually running a lot of those companies. I'm thinking about the fact of Ron Polnick, which is a company that I'm not even sure if they're still here, but at the time they were here and all of that. It was a French-based company. And of course, everybody knows that GlaxoSmithKline, which is one of the cornerstones of this area's Research Triangle Park, is a British company. So sometimes the immigration isn't just the workers, it's also companies that are coming here as well. And some of them are coming from other parts of the world. And of course,
not as many.
Immigration is still there, but they have, major offices here as well.
But not as many as far as people. I won't say companies, but not as many as far as people. There is a special category visa that's available only to Australians called the E3. There is a quota for that visa. That's part of the American-Australian Free Trade Agreement, and that quota has never been hit. It's never even been close to being hit, to the point that they're now allowing that visa to be used by Irish people, and they still can't fill the quota. So trying to attract, the best and brightest from wealthy countries is not something that's working. Not in America, not in Canada that's trying to do that, not in Australia. And I think that is reflective of a problem. We shouldn't only be attracting people who are desperate. And when we do that, we are also taking the very best from poor countries and leaving them poorer as a result.
Yeah.
So yeah, and we're gonna now we're gonna begin going to Rex. But before I hand it to Rex, I wanted to say the reason that I wanted to bring this up is that we're hearing so much about foreign-born immigration on the border. I mean, the border immigration, that we're not having the debate about skilled immigration, and it can be very confusing because there is an argument to be made that Shaquille made the argument that we are taking away American jobs by having foreigners with obviously green cards. But the other argument is the value of the foreign-born entrepreneur rule is that you wouldn't have those companies leave the United States and go to Canada, go to Australia, go to New Zealand, go to Europe, Israel to start their companies. So are we losing jobs potentially, right? So I think there's some underlying policy arguments, but this whole idea that we want to keep all the immigrants out. To me, 44% of the Fortune 500 was started by immigrants. So this is why I brought this up today in my op-ed, but I'm sorry for the echo. With that being said, we'll come back and talk about this at the end of the show. But we have today, what better time to talk about security and privacy than today, as we are all getting over the Colonial Pipeline cyber attacks. People are now really on edge about, is my data secure? Am I network secure? What's next? Could it be the power grid? Could it be our water utility? So in this Tech Talk Tuesday, we're going to listen to Jay Glasgow once again inform us and shed light on these important issues. So Jay, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I don't know if you can see me or the conversation. So, I appreciate the conversation. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, terrific. And Steve is teaching us how to tie a tie, which is exciting also. So thank you for that.
It was great.
That's brilliant. A little to your right, actually. There you go. A little more.
There you go.
Okay, yeah. All right, so immigration, it's a hot topic, and from what I gathered listening to the conversation, probably one of the kind of biggest concepts I heard was that immigrants. So that killed me, right? There we go. Immigrants have helped in really great ways. They've been a very positive influence, and so we should let them come in. Is that basically the crux of it, right?
Yeah. Well, the crux is that there's been so much talk about immigration on the border that the skilled immigration conversation sort of goes away. And that's like a big problem because we have many people that have been waiting, some of them 10, 20 years to become citizens that are producing to the economy, that are filling the job, and now they're leaving America because they're like, so that's what's going on here, is that an elephant in the room that we're not really talking about. But there's also concerns about them taking American jobs. Shaquille Latimer brought up some points. Shouldn't we be thinking about people that went through the universities rather than bringing foreigners in, which was President Trump's argument: make America great again. Keep the immigrants.
Well, no, I'm not
I don't think that was President Trump's argument. What we're doing is seriously. Let's take just a breather here. I think we've conflated two things, right? Go ahead. Somebody else wants to speak.
No, sorry, I just wanted to say, Jay, that wasn't the only thing I said there. I also said it's not just about taking away opportunities from Americans or from people in Western countries, but it's also taking the best and brightest out of what can be very poor countries, which leaves those countries poorer as a result because they've lost all their talent. That's
an excellent point. Thank you, Shaquille.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Let me take another run at this. I think first of all, we've conflated a couple of things. And what that means is we've taken two things that shouldn't be pushed together and we've pushed them together into one thing. And because we do that, we come to different conclusions than we would naturally come to, right? If we lump illegal immigration into legal immigration, we start to get a totally skewed view on this topic, right? So let's separate that for just a moment. And I want to ask you, gentlemen, a pretty sober question. If a person was legally here in the United States, that's mean they went through all of the process to be here, which is considerable. And, illegal immigration costs the average person to come in $10,000, right? Legal immigration costs way, way, way more than that, right? So a person paying out of their pocket is going to be out a considerable sum of money to get into the United States. So I'm just talking about the legal ones now, people that are legally here. They paid $50,000, $100,000, $200,000. You mentioned the A3. There's another visa for corporations. So if you're the CEO of a corporation and you want to migrate here, that visa costs $500,000. It's a $500,000. You just write the check to the U.S. government for $500,000, and you can move your company here. And it brings with it your immigration papers. So if you're a foreign rich person, you can come into the United States, no problem. That's been around for decades. Now, my question to you, very sobering question, is: if you paid $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 to be in the United States, and criminal activity came up to you and started harassing you, trying to shake you down for money, what would you do?
Guys, I don't know. I haven't thought about that.
If you paid to be here and you did everything legally correctly, and then bad guys started trying to shake you down criminally for money, what would you do? How would you handle it? You're here legally.
You'd have to take that up with the law. I mean, you definitely have to do something in terms of the legal community and take it up with the law and all of that. So that's what I would do. I would be definitely making a visit to probably the federal law enforcement, and actually would not necessarily go to either local law enforcement, but it'd either be state or federal law enforcement.
Right. Our records show that people that are here legally, over 90%, of the time, will notify law enforcement if they have a problem. So that's true. What you just said was absolutely true. Now, let me ask you the next question. If you were here illegally, you paid $10,000 out of your pocket, you've lost your family, you've gone through hell to get here, you're finally here, you're here illegally, and criminal activity starts to shake you down for money, what are you going to do?
Well, one, you're not calling law enforcement, because law enforcement, that brings them into the whole picture as well. We saw that with ICE and some of the other things that have happened in our Latin American communities and things of that nature. I'm thinking you're going to have to go, and I hate to put it this way, but you asked a tough question. I think you're going to have to go to a rival organization. So, there's that whole gang mentality. So I'm thinking you're going to have to hit, if it's, say, the Italians that are shaking you down, you're going to have to go to the Jamaicans. So that's what I'm thinking.
There you go. Yeah. There you go. So let me ask you the third question. This is a great follow-on, Mark, to what you just answered. And that is, if we're compassionate, big-hearted people who need skilled labor, we need people to work in our farms, we need people to tidy up our yards, we need people to be nannies to our children, and we're compassionate and we're big-hearted. And we say what? Do we say, I want you, Mr. or Mrs. Illegal Immigrant, right, or Ms. Illegal Immigrant, to cross the border and threaten your own life, and when you get here, I want you to feel completely unsafe, and I want our criminal underbelly of the United States, the scum of the scum, to openly feed on you, and if you don't like it, I want you to go join a gang. And that's the way I feel as a big-hearted person. That's compassion. I want to have compassion on you, and I want you to be thrown into this gang environment, and I want these criminals to start feeding on you as soon as you come across the border. Is that our thought? Is that, as compassionate human beings, do we say that? I don't think we do. I think what we say is we shift the argument by conflating illegal and legal immigrants together, and we say they've done a lot of good. Most of the Fortune 500 companies are immigration companies. And then without saying it, what we're really trying to allude to is we should not worry about this illegal immigration problem. And I'm saying there's a totally different vector on this problem that we as compassionate people are totally ignoring.
Yes.
And that is that illegal immigrants are the biggest pool of victims in the entire world, and we are actually helping them be victimized.
Yeah, Rex, that's a good point.
If I can just say to that point, Jay, we were actually talking about skilled immigrants, which implies that it's legal. But on the point about, is there a lack of compassion when your country allows illegal immigrants to be the victims of crime? There's a lack of compassion anyway. I mean, look at all the homeless people in places where I've been, in Oregon, in Washington State, in Chicago when I was there, in California, people who have severe drug problems, potentially mental health problems, and they're left to just rot on the street. There's no care or compassion, and the idea is, oh, well, let's just let them be. That is such a horrible way to treat fellow Americans. And I would say that if a country treats its own poor that way, what hope does an immigrant people otherwise have in the country?
Yeah, they're still clamoring to be here because here is better than where they came from. And to be totally candid, if I was coming from where they're coming from, I would do absolutely everything I could to get into America, right? I mean, I have empathy. I have empathy for their position, but as an American, I'm concerned about the criminal element that's feeding upon these immigrants, and it's a billion-dollar industry here in the States, and most of those criminals are actually acting out of legal business arrangements, right? So these are lawyers, these are notaries, these are check cashing companies, these are job finders, these are apartment finders. There's this kind of scummy bottom undergrowth layer of businesses here in the States that feed off of these people, and they shake them down for money, and the people that are victims are scared to death to say, hey, this guy promised me a visa if I gave him $10,000. I gave it to him, and then he left town.
Hey Jay,
right?
but my question on that is it just feeding off of the immigrant population? Because you can make that same argument that it's feeding off of those that are in the urban areas because of a lack of opportunities. Some of what we're talking about based on what Shaquille is saying, based on the jobs going towards certain folks and everything within certain communities. Now, the argument that I've heard on the opposite side of that, just to come to something that Shaquille said, is that sometimes some of these jobs are less than appealing. Because like I said, we're talking about nannies, we're talking about farm workers, we're talking about a lot of these other kinds of jobs and everything. And I've actually had this conversation with some friends of mine and asked them, would they go for those jobs? And in a lot of cases, they blatantly say no. They'd rather try to find some other kind of work or freelance or anything else versus doing some very hard labor, because some of the labor is very hard labor that some of the immigrants are being attracted to as well. But definitely it can be said that it's impacting our urban youth as well.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting argument. You know, I'm very centrist on this whole argument. I'm not conservative or liberal. I'm arguing from the middle. Sometimes it sounds like I'm pulling one side or the other because I'm arguing from the middle here. But what you just stated was a very meritocratic argument for people that usually typically deny meritocracy, right? They're saying, hey, I actually deserve better than to work in these menial jobs because I've got the merit, right? So we either believe in meritocracy or we don't. But that aside, I think you make a compelling argument why we should shun and we should protect against illegal immigrants. It's a totally illegal immigration, not immigrants, and that is that we don't pay them enough. You know, some of these people that say I would never be a nanny for $2.50 an hour would turn around and say, but I would be a nanny for $10. And if that's what the market would bear, that's what they could get. But the market's not going to bear that as long as we have this nasty undergrowth of legal businesses, right? And by the way, you make a really valid point here, Mark. These businesses have been around a lot longer than the illegal immigration problem. Go back to the show Good Times in the 70s. One of the lines in the beginning titles was easy credit ripoffs, right? That's a line from a TV show that was very popular in the 70s about life in the ghetto. But I will say this, Mark, do a heat map on the density, population density of some of these businesses, and they have shifted out of Chicago, where Good Times took place, and they are now all arrayed along the border, and they're all using high tech. They're using data to manipulate illegal immigrants as best they can to gather insights about them and to actually pick them clean to take as much money as they possibly can. So they're using data from social media. They're using data from all over. This is why Privacy Co-op is involved. We actually want to make it free and easy for illegal immigrants that are here illegally to opt out of big tech using their data. So we don't even ask the question, are you legal, what your status is. We just give you the tools for free so that you can opt out of these businesses using your data. That's what we're doing as a compassionate company.
No,
So
and y'all
Jay,
are definitely doing a great job and everything. One of the things I was
well,
going to say, talking about that TV element and everything, is a friend of mine actually probably about 10 years ago, if not longer, did a telenovela. You know, that's one of those Spanish soap operas and everything, but it was actually based on predatory lending. So I remember that my friend Dilcy and several others did a TV show that actually got picked up by a couple of folks called Nostro Barrio. But that's what it was all about, was based on the whole concept of predatory lending, because it's actually a group that fights against that here in North Carolina and in Durham. That was actually the producers of that particular show and everything. So it sounds like y'all are doing some similar work. And like I said, that was probably some 10 years ago that was going on.
Yeah, the fact that there's a successful TV show on this topic highlights how serious the problem is, and we cover that problem over when we artificially conflate legal and illegal immigration together. We do harm to the people that we're trying to protect. We should really comb those two things apart and talk about them in isolation and really focus in on all the problems that are involved with illegal immigration. And I think the liberal mindset, the compassionate mindset, and the progressive mindset would shift quite a bit if they looked at the entire issue in that light. And so I really appreciate your words.
so we're gonna. So Jay, tell us about cybersecurity. We're gonna go. Tell us what you're gonna talk about today.
Sure, absolutely. Well, tonight on a TV show called Private Eye that we launched a few weeks ago, we're going to have a discussion on Rose Davis's paper, Data Genocide. And as we started doing the run up to this, we talked to a lot of specialists around the world. And guys, I'm getting a lot of echo in my ear, but I'm hoping that the folks that are watching this on TV are not. But what we did in the run up of this was we talked to a lot of really great specialists in the area and asked some questions. And we talked to one attorney out in Seattle. He's a thought leader in the world, a member of WEF and a professor at a university. He actually teaches not only law, but he teaches physics, if you can believe that. So this guy is like a super genius. And as we were talking about this idea of data genocide, and some of the folks here on this show have chimed in on their thoughts of it, he said we were burying the lead. And I wanted to get folks' thoughts on this. He said, Jay, you're burying the lead. And I said, how can we be burying the lead on a topic about digital murder and data genocide? And tonight we're going to feature an interview with Rose Davis, the lady that wrote the paper, the sociologist that wrote the paper on data genocide. It's going to be, I'm telling you guys, this is just one smoking hot show tonight. So if you're not subscribed to Private Eye, make sure you take time to do that today. So what he said when he said we're burying the lead, and by the way, you know that lead is spelled L-E-D-E, but no spell checker I've been able to find spells it that way. They all try to change it to L-E-A-D, but lead, L-E-D-E, that's the first line of a newspaper article, right? So if you don't speak about the most important thing first, they say you're burying the lead. You're moving it down in the story and making the reader read down. And I said, well, what could possibly be a bigger lead than are we living in an age of data genocide? And he said, let me see if I can share the presentation. Maybe you guys can put it up.
Yeah, I'll do that. Give me one second.
And maybe we can bring in the panel because I'd like this to be an open conversation. Terrific.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah, so he said the lead is, are FANG, that's Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, are they sovereign? And I'll tell you guys, I was stunned when he asked the question, are they sovereign? I was like...
are we talking sovereign as in like a sovereign nation and have their own rights and everything of that nature? Shockingly, because of this whole concept of corporations as having rights and things of that nature, I remember that was actually an issue within the Occupy movement, and I was actually part of that for a while and everything. I would say that they probably are sovereign, and that may shock a lot of folks, but I would say that they probably are sovereign with their own rules and regulations and things along those lines. But that's just my guess.
I get you, Mark, and I appreciate it. You know, I was stunned, and I looked at him and I said, do you mean like a Westphalian sovereign? You know, the Treaty of Westphalia, they had established nation states, in the year 1648 at the end of the 30 Years' War, and he said, yes, I mean exactly like that. Are they sovereign? What are your thoughts maybe on this, Rakesh? I'm sorry, Rakesh, not Rakesh. Anybody else? I saw the blank window and I was hoping he was here, but I don't have my glasses yet. How about you, Shaq?
I'm sorry, I was trading. I was looking at the market, so I'll have to come back to you in a second.
Oh, that's fine. Take your time. So, okay. So Steve is here.
No, I'm watching the Crown on Netflix, so I've been getting more in the depth of the sovereign, right? And so
Yeah.
you made me think about when I think of sovereign, and right now I'm on the scene of Netflix on the Crown, where there's a guy named Lord Autrium who is all upset about the sovereignty in Britain. This was during the 1950s. It's just he's working with Queen Elizabeth to say, you need to be in touch with the people. You need to act. You need to have not only like a radio addresses, but you need to come on TV and you need to quit acting like all of you all are so above the rest of Britain. And so when I think of sovereign, I do think that these tech giants are sovereign in the extent that they really are the face of technology, even though there's a lot of other small tech and innovation out there. They dominate the conversation, right?
Yeah.
They've created monopolies, and it's almost like, well, we can do that because we're bigger, we're better, we're badass, we're FANG, get out of the way.
They're
Right?
Well, yeah,
they're running things and everything along those lines. I did have a side and just a quick aside because I do want Jay to get to his primary point and everything. But speaking of that, I just recently saw that they're giving the prince a little bit more rule as to what he can do over there in England. And that's one of the things that he was talking about was a sovereign decision, because with the backing of the queen, and she's up there in age and everything, they're now saying that they're going to open up a lot of their property that is usually open for a limited amount of time. So there will still be a limited amount of time, but it's going to be more extended. So they're going to be opening it more public because that's something that Prince William, I believe it is, wants to do more of. So he's actually already stated that he wants to give a little bit more of that public rights to people to come in and go to these various buildings that oftentimes are very exclusive, and you can only go to the royal gardens maybe 4 or 5 months of the year or whatever, but he wants to do it more regularly.
Well, beyond the royal aspect of this, there's a lot to the word sovereign, but self-determination is probably key here, and this concept of manifest destiny that kind of raised its head in the 1900s, 1800s. But let me advance this conversation a little bit. When I say are they sovereigns, I mean Westphalian sovereigns, and when meaning a true sovereign. They act within their own rules. They are completely sovereign. And I kind of winced at that a little bit, and I asked this guy, and he's a genius, guys, and I just felt odd even questioning him. And when I did, I said, are you saying really Westphalian, like a Westphalian nation state? And he said, name for me another country that has 2 billion people in its population. Yeah. That took my breath. Right? Facebook has 2 billion members right now. They have a constitution. They have an agreement that you agree to when you become a member of Facebook. There's really no way to quit Facebook. You can delete the app and you can say, I'm not going to post anymore. In some states, you can say, delete all my personal data, but the way that they define personal data, that's very limited. They're not deleting all of your data. So once you're a member of Facebook, you never really can leave. It's I hate to go back to Soviet era, but it's a little like a Eastern Bloc country where once you're in there, you can't get out of the walls. So they have a population of 2 billion people. Name for me any other country on the planet that's got 2 billion people as a population. I don't think there is one. That's larger than India. That's larger than China, right?
Yeah, that's right.
You start thinking about it in those terms. And so when I said, let me look into this, I went to the textbooks and I looked up Westphalian sovereign. And what is the characteristics that make up a Westphalian sovereign? Number one, they have a permanent population. Well, we've already established Facebook's got that. I don't know anybody else that's tried to leave any of the other platforms. I deleted myself from Netflix about 2 or 3 years ago, and I still get their mail. And even though I've opted out, I'm still contacted by them. So they're a prime candidate for class action, but they're still doing it, right? The second thing is they have a defined territory. So let me stretch your imagination for a second. They don't have land, right? But they do have territory. What is the territory that Facebook has?
I mean, they've got digital territory. They're in a digital space, so there's definitely got that digital territory and all of that. So they're in a digital space. One thing I was going to ask, and it might come into the conversation as you're talking about this, but what about people that try to go against them? Like I said, I was actually attending a seminar, I want to say it was maybe 3 or 4 days ago, and they were talking about this new platform called Local, which is supposedly supposed to be something that goes against the Facebook and is a counter to that. And some people would argue, and I just recently joined it because they opened themselves up to Android, that Clubhouse might become a counterpart to Facebook and all of that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on those.
Yeah, typically they get obliterated, and there's myriad weapons that the big tech uses against these people. You know, Clubhouse has been given a little bit of extra space because they're going to be purchased by one of these guys, so they're allowed to develop their audience. But if you're persona non grata with them, they have 1,000 different ways to shut you down. You know, the Secret Service, somebody told, I think, Trump in his first week, hey, there's 9 ways to Sunday that they can take you out. Well, there's 1,000 different ways to Sunday for these folks to take you out. So they do have a defined territory. Let me expand on that briefly. If I went to try to put my web page up, Privacy Co-op, under facebook.com/privacy co-op, I first of all, technically, it can't be done by the rules of the internet. But let's say that I could. There's an organization called ICANN, ICANN, that governs URLs around the world, and they could just come in and shut me down, right? So there is a defined territory for these FANG. The next question, or the next feature of a sovereign, is one leadership. All of these businesses have one leadership. They have one structure. But, it's really telling that Elizabeth Warren just was in the news last week. We're going to feature this on the show tonight. Just last week, she was addressing the fact that Mark Zuckerberg calls his oversight committee that just launched a couple of weeks ago and very famously said we're going to continue to ban Donald Trump. He calls that group within Facebook the Supreme Court, not our Supreme Court. He calls it the Supreme Court. And Elizabeth Warren points out that's just absolutely the height of arrogance, that none of these people have gone before Congress, none of them have been vetted. But see, in Mark Zuckerberg's mind, his territory is not confined to the geographic territory of the United States, nor is it confined to the sovereignty of the United States. His sovereignty expands beyond borders. It goes around the world, and his population is 2 billion strong. So when he says our group inside our organization is called the Supreme Court, there's really nobody that can challenge him on that. But they certainly have one leadership, all 5 of these organizations. The next is, do they have the capacity to enter into relationships with other sovereigns? Well, Google certainly has a totally different relationship with Australia than they do with China. Right? Recently, Australia tried to pass a law that says, hey, if you're going to monetize our local news services, then you need to pay them. Well, Google's come back to that without blushing. They ran a public video that said, if Australia takes that step, we're going to shut down our search engine for all of Australia. So now we're going to take their search ability away during an emergency. We're going to basically cripple all of their businesses. We're going to shut them down. We're going to genocide. We're going to wipe out the entire population digitally, right? So can they have the capacity for relationships? The last I heard, Australia blinked on that one. They didn't, rise up and say, well, we're going to do it anyway.
There's a little bit more to the story than that, Jay.
I know, and for the brevity of time, that's the crux of it from my perspective. But please, you feel free to prove me wrong at some point.
No. It's not about proving you wrong. But I do just want to say that, look, back in the days of the oil barons, people were very concerned about just how much power and control and influence they had. Back in the days of the US railways, people were very concerned about that. There were comic books, or comics, I should say, and cartoons and newspapers where the train lines were like octopus arms, around the Congress buildings. And people were very, very worried about that. And I think that we're just facing this at the moment with the tech world. It's very interesting to see that there are countries, especially the European Union, who are standing up and trying to regulate this. So I think that whilst things seem a little bit out of control at the moment, I think that there will be some changes made and probably some antitrust suits coming.
Yeah, and good luck with that. I don't think it's going to work for a myriad reasons, but we can, again, that's a totally different topic.
Hey,
But going
Jay,
back to the presentation. Oh, sorry. Go
yeah,
ahead, Mark.
one quick question and everything, and it actually comes back to something that Shaquille was talking about, and this whole concept of what you got with the sovereigns and everything. One of those sovereigns you said is one leadership, and I think it was Shaquille that just mentioned the robber barons and all of that. And a lot of times there is a what do you call it, a flow of inheritance, so an inheritance flow and everything. And I don't know necessarily, and maybe you can show me where it exists, that there's that kind of flow with, say, the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Gates and the Tesla, Elon Musk, and all of that, because I don't know that there's enough of a royal passing down, either corporately or family line wise, and all of
Yeah.
that. So that's one of the things I'm wondering about within the one leadership context. Is there an
Well,
actual flow that's going to keep these companies running for, say, 100, 200 years? Because like the robber barons, some of those families have, they don't have as much influence as they used to have. So I get
yeah,
that
I
Zuckerberg
think,
got amazing power now, but will his descendants always have it, whether that's a corporate descendant or a family descendant?
sure. I think there's a direct answer to your question. We sometimes artificially munge together this idea of sovereign with royalty. Sovereign means self-determining. In fact, you do not see bloodline on any of these items, right? So the United States is a sovereign, right? Do we have a bloodline ascendancy? Do we have children of the president that then become president? Well, I guess we do, but that's by election, right? So the few times that's happened, it's not because they have a birthright to it, right? So, and I know there's a cute little, we could do wordplay on even that, but it is not a bloodline or a holy bloodline that's in the United States, nor is it in the majority of the countries. And yet all of these countries are sovereign. Certainly these companies, if they're sovereign, they don't require a bloodline. They're an incorporated entity. They have an incorporated.
Some people would argue that it's about the elite and that the elite create their
no,
own bloodline. But that's a whole other story.
Yeah, I think it is. Again, we are not trying to cast this in a jeweled crown setting. We are saying that they are a sovereign, as in a nation state that can run their own business the way that they want to, externally to all other countries, right? It's no longer a geographic definition to this. The definition of territory is an online territory. It's not a physical territory.
Right.
They have to be independent to be a sovereign, and these organizations are certainly independent, as we've already noted by a few anecdotal pieces. And then lastly, it's not required for them to be recognized as a sovereign in order to be a sovereign. That's in more recent sociological studies. And the reason that sociologists about 150, 200 years ago made this statement that you don't have to recognize the sovereign in order to be a sovereign, why do you think that was? This is a great brain teaser. Why did people say, hey, if you're not recognized by some world body as a sovereign, you can still be a sovereign if you meet all of those other criteria? And I'll tell you the reason. Dr. Seuss had a famous story about the Sneetches, and it was the stars on theirs. Some of them had stars, some of them did not have stars. The ones that did not have stars were considered not as organized, not as civil as the ones that had stars, right? Well, in the 1700s, when we first established this concept of nation states, all of the countries that had stars on theirs, England, France, this was before the United States was formed. All of the sovereigns that were around at the time that had their act together and had sociologists that could say, yes, we are a sovereign state per the Treaty of Westphalia that ended the 30 Years' War, they said there's a standard of civilization, and if you don't meet that, South Africa, if you don't meet that, Kenya, right? If you don't meet that, fill in the blank, you are not a sovereign state. So therefore, we can colonize you. We can enslave you. This is what gave rise to the slave trade. This very thing. Now, here's the question that we have to ask. Yes, sovereignty. It was the definition of sovereignty in the ending a war. So sovereignty did a good thing. It ended a war with the Holy Roman Empire in Europe in 1648. That was an important thing to have happen. And yet all of these countries that became sovereign became jackasses and started going around the world and basically doing whatever they wanted to, right? This isn't the history of the United States. This is the history of sovereigns and how they behave once you give them this power. And my question that came right back to Rose's paper on data genocide is, are these members of FANG feeling their own oats? Have they arisen to their position of sovereign and realize that they are completely independent? And do they view all the rest of us as unorganized and uncivilized, that we do not raise up to the standard of civilization? And so therefore we are all fodder for colonization and enslavement. And the only answer I have for you, and I want to hear everybody's thoughts on this because I'm going to shut up for the rest of the show. The only solution to this is organization. And the only way that we can organize, we can't do it by governments going in and trying to knock them down with antitrust, because they'll just move their headquarters to another country, right? What we're talking about here is not a legal issue of one sovereign trying to take over another sovereign. They can't. They can't. It's impossible for the United States to take over Russia and go in and start telling Russia what to do. It's not going to happen. The United States is not going to go into Facebook and say, I'm sorry, you're just simply too big. We're going to break you up. It's not going to happen because they are a sovereign, right? So the only solution is for us to organize and become our own entity. And that's exactly why Privacy Co-op was formed, was so that we could all join an organization together and say, well, here's our rights. Here are our terms and conditions. So I'm encouraging all the viewers right now, if you've never thought about being a member of the Privacy Co-op, and if you're shaken up by this conversation, this is precisely why we formed the Privacy Co-op 3 years ago. And it took this great legal mind in Seattle just simply asking me the question, are we burying the lead when we talk about data genocide? What an enlightening conversation that was.
Well,
I thank you guys for letting me share this.
No, this was a great conversation. We've got about 6 minutes left. Are there any other, well, if we have any questions for Jay? The other thing we didn't talk about today, just a continued thing, that Israeli airstrikes continue in Gaza. President Biden has been asking for a ceasefire. We'll be talking about what does this mean for U.S. foreign policy? The grass crisis seems to be getting better. And, we're just getting used to this idea in America. If you're watching around the world, we're not wearing masks, people going to restaurants. Carolina Hurricanes, shout out to them for winning their first game of the Stanley Cup playoffs, and 12,000 people in the arena. So there was a lot of energy there. But Sasha Starr, you've been sort of quiet. Do you have any observations about anything about this presentation or anything going on in the world?
Well, I'm surprised that this presentation finished so abruptly. I think there's so much more to talk about it. I'm just curious about something. So let's see, you cooperative or some individuals or whoever they are going to Facebook and saying, okay, there are your rules and there are our rules, and now we have to play by your rules, but also by our rules. Let me ask you this. Do you think Facebook even will respond to that? And if they will respond to that, probably they will say, get out of here. We
I know.
Your account forever.
I have an answer for you, Sasha. That's a great question, and I do have an answer for it.
Okay.
I'll guide everybody to a report. We put it under a tiny URL, so you can go to tinyurl.com. That's easy to remember. /CRAA report. CRAA report. It's Consumer Reports doing a study last February. That's just 3 or 4 months ago, on the role of authorized agencies. So the fact that we can still go to Facebook and say, I'm opting this group of people out of you using their data for secondary purposes, meaning you can't monetize their data until you agree to our terms and conditions. And it's a great read. It shows you that the overwhelming majority of these corporations do respond to those requests because it's in a contract. It's in their own data use policy that you can opt out. So what we're doing on behalf of all of our members is going to Facebook and saying, basically, cease and desist until you agree to our terms, and that shuts down their ability to monetize the data. That's a very serious weapon that we have right now.
Okay. For how long are you doing that?
We've been doing it for 3 years, and we're one of the first, if not the first, authorized agency in the world. And we're going to do it forever because that's our charter. That's exactly what we do.
You have to, until you will run out of money. But if you don't, you just continue to do that. But tell me, what are the practical results so far in 3 years? How would you qualify and verify the size, the merits, the results achieved in these 3 years?
I can, in a 30-second soundbite, the greatest results we had last November, we paid all of our members a dividend. So as a nonprofit, we had to pay out all of the money that we had left over by the end of the year, right? So in November, we paid out to all of our members $28.45. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but if you only paid $25 to become a member and you got back $28.45, you made $3.45 profit. And that payment that you made to us is to buy a share in the company. It's not a monthly payment. It's not an annual payment, right? So now the next dividend that we pay out, that's pure profit for those people that were early members, right? And that's a sign that what we're doing with the licensing of the information, because the second step is these companies come back and say, well, how do we get an opt-in from your members? And we say, license the use of the information per our terms and conditions. And that's how we get the reciprocal contract in place. And by the way, the companies love that because that immediately brings them in compliance with all the regulations of privacy in 128 competing countries right now that have different regulations. So these independent sovereigns, just to save risk and mitigate all of their liability, are signing licensing agreements with our organization so that they can operate in 128 countries with relative immunity to regulations and fines.
Hey,
Yeah,
Jay,
so this is a good business model. You can stay around for another few years and make money.
I'm worried that I might have to now. I don't know if I was a member back then, Jay, but this year I'm going to have to file taxes in the United States for my $28.
yeah, and Jay, along those same lines,
Brilliant.
you're talking about a big mammoth corporation. I do remember Ma Bell when it was big and mammoth and everything. But if there's 2 billion members and you're not whittling down the membership, will Facebook always have that power? Because, like you said, it's a 2 billion strong institution, and who knows, it may be 3 billion by the end of the year or however many.
I think that's a great question, and I can answer it. It's a bit of an esoteric question, but I'll go for it in 30 seconds or less if I can. I'm a Scottish American. That means I have Scottish lineage and I am an American citizen, but I don't pay taxes in Scotland, right? So I can't claim that Scotland is my sovereign home. The United States is. So once you bifurcate a leadership, once you start to say that people are of two lineages and it occupies the same space-time, you start to water down that concept of sovereignty a little bit, right? So if you're a member of the Privacy Co-op and you will go on Facebook and they have agreed to license your information, it starts to muddy this whole sovereignty discussion, and it brings it back to what it should be, which is they're a service provider. You're a member of that service, and you have rights too, and they agree to your rights. So it really becomes more of a battle of the forms conversation than it does a sovereign conversation, which is where it needs to be.
You know what? Another question would be: so those people who are still using Facebook but becoming members of your co-op, why wouldn't Facebook impose a small charge for their using Facebook? I know probably $5 a month would do, because they will get $28 dividend from you and $5 a month. Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, it still works. Okay.
Yeah, so there's an answer for that too. The reason Facebook would not charge for their services is because their richness of their data insights is the money. That's the money stream. They would not kill off the goose that lays the golden egg. They make more money from being able to freely advertise you with an opt-in than they would be able to for charging for the service, right? So if the exchange is that they pay us 30 cents for your opt-in versus getting you to pay them $5, they actually lose money on the deal where you pay them $5 because then they can't monetize your data.
The watershed is then 30. What do you say? 30 cents. Okay,
Yeah,
so
30 cents to license the use of one person's data for the year. You do that over millions, and it becomes the revenue that becomes dividends to our members. That's correct.
So,
I see.
folks,
Wonderful.
we're
Okay,
all out of
no more
time.
questions. Steve, go on, please.
No. Last question. We're
Last
over time.
question.
Though. We're over time. Go ahead, Sasha. We're over time though.
No, I'm greatly satisfied. I'm just curious. How often can you devote all hour for a subject that interests very few people, if any? I'm just very curious. But thank you and good luck.
We'll talk
That's
about
a
that. We'll talk about that tomorrow, Sasha. So appreciate it. Sorry, go ahead, Jay. Guys. We're over time, but
no. That's it. Thank you.
okay,
Really
great.
appreciate being here.
Well,
No, great discussion and everything. I know that Steve, you're going to toss it off. I did have one question I want to bring up for tomorrow's show, and maybe people can think about it and reflect on it. Since we did not get to Israel and everything, but I was actually watching a friend of mine's show that she does regularly, and she had a gentleman from Israel, and they were talking about what does Zionism mean, and he actually had a different definition than some people might have. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts of what that term means and everything. And it can even come back to what we're talking about today, because I'm thinking that right now we're all part of this whole Facebook nation. So that means that I hate to tell you this, Steve, but you are no longer Indian American. You are now Indian Facebook American. So just letting you know.
okay, great. Well, folks, it's been a great show today. Want to thank everybody for having a wonderful discussion about immigration. And on that note, there are many immigrants here in the Triangle in North Carolina, across the nation, from the nation of India, who are waking up this morning with someone that's no longer in their lives. And we continue to pray for any family who's lost a loved one during this pandemic, and we pray for India that they get through COVID hell and do what we can to help them. And we'll be back tomorrow for another edition of Pod TV World Edition. Want to thank all of you for being with us, and we'll be back tomorrow. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. God bless all of you.